Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the wider implications of cronyism and societal trust, social trust overall, and the knock-on effects of declining social trust. Because we need to accept that in the West now, we're on a trajectory of sharply declining social trust, and that's in a number of areas, in a number of ways. So the West, and I use Australia as an example, Britain or whatever, the West has had, on a relative basis, and I've mentioned this numerous times before. I think this is a huge issue, and I'm surprised it's not getting more traction. But the West has had a much higher social trust than any other area of the world. Now, when I first started traveling on business, I assumed that the level of social trust in Australia was about the normal. That's how things were. So I was really taken aback when I noticed traveling how social trust almost doesn't exist. It's non-existent in some parts of the world, or it's so low that you seem to think it's non-existent. You get a small rich elite that maybe have social trust, but it's more because they're bound to each other. And their need to protect each other and their privileges is more what creates a social trust amongst a rich elite, a corrupt rich elite, by the way. So outside of that, and again, that's not really social trust. Outside of that, the people don't trust the government don't trust the people. Person to person, people don't trust each other. You can't trust anyone who you don't know or didn't grow up with or isn't a family member. These sorts of things, if you don't have a blood relationship. Now, this is even the case in places like, say, Hong Kong, where the British had been there for well over 100 years. The social trust these people had was about zip. And it's very difficult to do business with people where there's no natural levels of social trust. So the transactional cost of doing business at all levels is much higher in a low trust society, and a business can't get off the ground. Money isn't going to be loaned to somebody. Commercial activity will not happen because the social trust factor is so low. Now, if I meet a fellow, less so today, I guess, but certainly, if someone made a business proposal to me, for example, other than their competence, because they may be incompetent or they may have some pie in the sky view on things, but other than their competence, I assumed their good intentions and that they were trustworthy, that they weren't intending to screw me over. Now, their behaviour, once I was interacting with them, could get me to change my view. I think, gee, this is a sleazy dude, I'm not going to do business with them. So that could still happen. But the beginning point, the starting point, the underwriting point of the interaction was that they were trustworthy and they were trying to do the right thing, and they were coming with an idea or a business proposition they genuinely believed was viable and where we both could make money. So through collaboration, we both could get richer. And I just assumed that and 99 times, 98 times out of 100, that was the case. Sometimes the people were incompetent; they hadn't thought of things that that would make it a bit of a pie in the sky proposition, and so there was ineptitude or lack of experience, those sorts of things. But then I would look at it, well, can I correct that shortcoming? Is that the core idea, the kernel of the idea, still viable? In which case, if I add my value to the transaction, my value to their idea could be organizational, financial, whatever, then we can still make a lot of money together. So I would take that view. That's not that's not the view elsewhere in the world, in the third world countries. Nobody trusts any. The only people you can trust is either you hold something over them or a family member, which is equivalent of you hold something over them. So you need to be able to be in a position to direct maximum shame and blame, as in social appropriate, maximum shame and blame on somebody, which you can do to a family member. They'll be shunned by the family. They'll be outcast. Now, in societies like say Hong Kong or Chinese societies, Indian societies, and so on, pretty much everything you have and are going to have, and the protection you have against the the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune of the world. The protection you have is provided by your family. If by the people as an example, in Hong Kong, somebody lost their job or they got sick or something, and they couldn't make the payments on their property, all the other family members, including cousins and all that sort of thing, would all contribute to a few dollars each to help this person, tide them over while they were going through that unfortunate patch. So, and this was sort of how things were done. No one questioned it's what you did because they would do it for you, and such was the not so much the trust necessarily, but the obligatory level of cohesion within the family group, the blood relatives. So this was so there were different forms of social trust, but they were done in very narrow circles. For example, the family. Now, in every low trust society, things are decided through corruption. Indian, Pakistani society, that's a zero low. It's a very low trust society outside of the family or people that you totally can hold things over. So this idea of social trust or the existence of social trust means that the government more or less trusts the people more, within reason, that more or less trust the citizenry, the citizens trust each other to a degree. Again, it's not an absolute here, it's a relative thing to a degree. So this reduces the cost of, for example, when you go for a job interview or something like that, you assume that the person's CV, other than a bit of garnishing, is about right. You assume that when your prospective employer, the boss, says, well, the job involves doing A, B, and C. You think, okay, well that's about right. Okay, that's what I can expect. These are the hours. This is the pay. So you can expect reliable information, and the reason you treat the information as reliable is because you have high levels of social trust. That's that sort of level of social trust that used to exist is fast disappearing in the West. Now, the other side of it is in low trust societies, cronyism, corruption is absolutely fucking rampant. And I was again stunned when I go to what appeared to be a large commercial business in the third world country to find that everyone in the fucking room was a relative of somebody. They'd all known each other since early childhood. They're all related. Maybe there were some additions to the group through maybe marriage or something like that. But even then, they kind of knew the person and so on. So it was not only class-based and tribe-based and family-based and sort of thing, but it was extremely. There was no one there who didn't know him. The only people that weren't known in the room were the irrelevant ones. If you're irrelevant, then you could be an unknown. But if you were relevant, if you had any sort of power, any sort of prestige, any control, any input, any say in how things would happen, you were a relative, and that was it. Even again in big commercial organisations. Now you may find a case where 2 or 3 super influential, corrupt families may own the business, and so all their relatives kind of intermingled. You get that, but it didn't go outside of that. And you wanted to get something done, you bribed somebody. You put it under the table, you threatened them, or so there wasn't any merit-based activity that went on. Nothing was merit-based. It was all corrupt cronyism and patronage and nepotism and so on. So you can imagine these societies are very poor because there is no collaboration outside of a corrupt collaboration, and those collaborations are non-meritorious. Unlike the West, a rich society where there are many collaborations that are based purely on merit and social trust, which means new wealth creation is always very high, or has been very high in the West compared to all these other countries. Why can't they create new wealth? Because they've got no fucking social trust. Everything is corruption and cronyism, nepotism, and that's patronage. That's why. That's corrupt payments to politicians or whatever there might be. So this is why new wealth isn't created, and why the places always stay dirt fucking poor. And conversely, why the West is rich. Now, all this social trust, we're losing it. I mean, it's disappearing like sand through your fingers. It's insane. And why is that? Let's have a look at why the social trust is disappearing. Well, but typically, the immigration to first world countries came from other first world countries. Those other first world countries were rich countries, and they were also high trust societies. Now, there may be a little bit, I thought America had less social trust than Australia did, for example, but Um, just to illustrate, I mean, just I'm mentioning something as an aside here. I was in New York one day, and I was walking going to a meeting, actually, not far from Wall Street, where the New York Stock Exchange is, that road down there. So, and there was an elderly couple from rural America, and they asked, could I take a photograph? Now, the guy, this is an old guy and his wife. I'd have been, I don't know, 30 at the time or something. He's probably my age now, and I'm saying he's old. But he was he wanted to get a picture of his wife, but he wanted to get the New York Stock Exchange, that big stone building with all the ornamentation. He wanted to get that in the background. So given his camera was a fairly sort of modest one with a narrow angle lens, I started to walk backwards to try and get that building in the frame, along with him and his wife, get the building in frame. So I ended up having to go. I got into the road, and there was too much traffic, so I had to go then to the other side of the road. And as I was looking at the camera, trying to get the focus in the distance, the old guy, who wasn't a fit guy, so he was sort of chasing after me. Don't you steal my camera? What are you talking about? I'm trying to take the photograph you asked me. But to him, the trust was such that, hey, that guy's going to steal my camera. Here's me wearing my sharp, expensive suit, but I'm going to steal his shitbox camera. But that's a level of I mean, it may be just he was a paranoid dude, but it may, that to me indicated a level of trust. I wouldn't think that of somebody. That wouldn't be the first thing that would cross my mind. But I've been brought up in a higher trust society, so I don't see the world that way. Now, as we because all the typically, the immigrants coming to Australia or other Britain or other first world places, typically they'd be from other first world countries, mostly, not all, but mostly. And so we've got other high trust people coming in, and the low trust people were a minority. People coming from low trust societies. Now that's all changed. Now the mass immigration is mass immigration of people from low trust societies, and they're not we're not converting them to our good habits of high trust. The complete reverse is the case. They're converting the West, Australia, and so on into a low trust society. They see us as a bunch of because they've got no comprehension of high trust. They just don't know. They just cannot grasp it or conceive it. Even white people from Eastern Europe, that they just stand there goggle-eyed, think you guys are a bunch of naive little gullible flunkies that we can exploit. Nobody. So they see high trust as gullibility, and the same goes for people coming from the third world countries. They see a society built on high trust as being one that can be easily exploited. You can rig elections, you can bribe people, you can do this, do that. You can do all sorts of things as you would do in your corrupt shitbox basket case country you came from. But they don't understand how this high trust society is a fundamental, absolutely fundamental underpinning part of why the society is rich. If they want to recreate their poor societies, then fine. Now, at the same time, they don't understand social trust and its implications and ramifications for not only societal, good relations, but also to wealth creation. At the same time, particularly the people from the subcontinent, but elsewhere as well, they see the world as a fixed pot of money. You can't create more money by innovation, invention, organizational development, or efficiency. That they just can't conceive that. There's a fixed pot of money. You can only get more if you take what someone else has. And if you go to first world society that's rich and gullible, then you can take what the fuck you want. And that makes you rich, and it takes from them. And they've got so much anyway, and you should be entitled to some of that. So these are the issues here, or among the issues that are affecting the West today. Now, in addition to that, we've got breaking along, breaking up into groups, not simply along tribal lines, such as the Indian diaspora, the Chinese diaspora, the fucking, Ethiopian whatever, but breaking along genetic lines, if you will. And the Indian diaspora and the Chinese diaspora, they're very much that they've almost got an unwritten law. You can only spend money within the diaspora. If you've got to spend money outside of it, such as groceries at a national grocery store chain, well, you do it under sufferance. Otherwise, everything you spend, if you're an Indian, is with another Indian. And you're advancing the interests of the family is a priority. The idea that you've come to Australia to contribute to something is bullshit. You've come to take. and take as much as the fuck you can from these gullible, silly people that just, and if you're that gullible, you can screw them over. Well, more the fool them. That means you're a smart guy. Look, I outwitted Whitey and I stole his money. Whoa, you're a big fucking tough dude. And so these are the attitudes, mentalities that they come to. Now, not only is it along diaspora line, but on ideological lines. So you've got the government forcing companies to say, well, we're not going to let you have access to taxpayer money, government contracts, unless you can have a majority of black lesbians on the board, board of directors or in your management. So this creates a situation where companies or businesses are going, okay, this is bullshit. Why do we have to hire these black lesbians just because these ideological fanatics in the public service are saying so? Okay, well, we'll hire the black lesbians, okay, to shut you up. But in return, we want a cozy contract, some sleazy backroom corrupt deal, or we want monopolies so we can charge the customers more than they otherwise would have paid. So there's a massive on cost from all this, ideological, tribal lines, genetic, racial, diaspora, and just a sheer outright cronyism and corruption that goes on. These lower our standard of living, increase our cost of living, and make the relative creation of new wealth creation. And just to give you an illustration of how little new wealth is creation, if you look at the top paid jobs on the job boards, the employment job boards in Australia or elsewhere, the majority of the top paid jobs are not in the private sector at all, which is where they would be if new wealth was being created. The majority of well paid, this is the top paid fucking jobs, by the way, the majority of well paid jobs are in the public service and the NGOs and quangos, and any jobs that are in the ostensibly within the private sector are companies that are reliant almost completely on government contracts. Those are all the best paid jobs. In terms of the competitive private wealth sector, 15 or 20% of the employment in the better paid jobs, and they're not the best paid of those jobs, by the way, as in the private sector. That is a damning indictment, an illustration of how little new wealth is being created in the West. And it's an overall testament, I believe, and one that I think is incredibly important to pursue, is that we're transitioning from what was a high trust society into a low trust society. 25, 30 years ago, this was a high trust society in Australia. Now it's demonstrating the levels of trust or non-trust, low trust, that I used to see in third world countries. That's how bad it is. So it's a major issue, and I think it's one that should be getting headline billing. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.